Prince Harry almost did the unthinkable. He nearly erased centuries of royal bloodline with a single decision, one that would have changed everything we thought we knew about the House of Windsor. No more titles, no more family crest, no more ties to the monarchy that raised him. Just one name, Spencer. Not a rumor, not a media spin, but a real conversation. A private, face-to-face moment shared between Harry and his late mother's brother, Earl Charles Spencer, the man who gave that heartbreaking eulogy at Princess Diana's funeral, and someone Harry has always trusted. Why would a prince even consider such a radical move? Because for nearly half a year, Harry and Meghan found themselves at the center of a baffling, silent, bureaucratic standoff, one that felt less like a paperwork issue and more like a quiet war. For 6 months, the UK government failed to issue passports for their 2 children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. No reason given, no explanation offered, just silence. And behind that silence, Harry suspected a darker truth, one that pointed all the way back to the palace gates. He believed it wasn't just red tape holding things up. It was intentional, a cold, calculated move from someone high up. And at the center of that suspicion stood one man, his own father, King Charles III. Now, this story isn't just about paperwork delays. It's about power plays, about legacy, control, and a royal institution that still doesn't quite know what to do with its most rebellious, outspoken son. Because when a royal, born into wealth, prestige, and centuries of tradition, decides he's willing to give up his last name, that isn't just personal, that's political. And it's a signal that the monarchy may be cracking from the inside out. This wasn't just about Archie and Lilibet getting travel documents. It was about what their names represent, and it nearly ended in a royal name being cast aside forever. So, what drove Prince Harry to the edge? And why does this moment matter more than anyone realizes? Let's break it down. In most cases, getting a passport in the United Kingdom is a straightforward process. Submit your application, wait a few weeks, maybe 3 at most, and your shiny blue booklet arrives in the mail. It's the kind of mundane government task millions of Britons complete without thinking twice. But if your name is Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor or Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor, things aren't quite so simple. For Harry and Meghan, what should have been a routine matter quickly turned into a 6-month saga of unanswered questions and quiet panic. They filed the paperwork, they followed the steps, and then they waited and waited and waited. Weeks went by, then months. No emails, no phone calls, no letters, no explanation, no progress, just silence. At first, they chalked it up to sluggish bureaucracy. The UK Home Office had been under pressure in recent years, after all. Maybe it was a backlog, maybe someone misplaced a form, maybe the pandemic had left its mark on processing times. They tried to be patient, but patience turned to frustration. Frustration turned into suspicion, and soon enough, that suspicion hardened into something deeper: distrust. According to insiders close to the couple, Harry began to suspect that this wasn't just a clerical delay, it was a message, a quiet form of resistance from the very institution he had walked away from, a system that seemed determined to make his family's independence as difficult as possible. And the real trigger? A detail buried in the application forms: the titles. Listed clearly were the designations: Prince Archie of Sussex and Princess Lilibet of Sussex. Not just names, but declarations, and attached to them, the initials that have haunted the monarchy for generations: HRH, His or Her Royal Highness. It was 3 letters, but they carried the weight of centuries. And for some, within the palace walls, those letters represented a line that shouldn't be crossed, especially not by children of a couple who had stepped back from royal duty. The moment those titles appeared, the passport process ground to a halt. Behind closed doors, officials debated. Should they approve documents that would make these titles legally binding? Should they allow Archie and Lilibet's names to stand as they were, or block the process until the titles were removed? To Harry and Meghan, the message was loud and clear. Someone didn't want their children recognized. And suddenly, a simple passport became a battlefield. To understand the firestorm around the titles, you have to go back to 2020, when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stunned the world by announcing they were stepping back from their roles as working members of the royal family. It wasn't just a shift in duty, it was a seismic rupture in royal tradition. And part of that exit agreement included a quiet concession. They would no longer use their HRH titles. They technically still retained them. No act of parliament had stripped them of the honor, but they agreed not to use them in public or on any official documents. That, many thought, was the end of it. But then came September 2022 and the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. the monarchy shifted. A new king ascended the throne, King Charles III, and with that came a reshuffling of roles, responsibilities, and most critically, titles. Under royal protocols, once Charles became king, his grandchildren Archie and Lilibet were automatically entitled to be styled as prince and princess. This wasn't a favor, it was part of the established rulebook. And for Harry, that mattered. He had seen firsthand what it meant to live in a royal spotlight without protection, what it meant to be labeled less than by the very institution that raised you, and he wasn't about to let history repeat itself with his children. According to reporting from The Guardian, British officials hesitated to approve Archie. Hand Lilibet's passports not because of missing paperwork, but because the HRH titles were listed in full, and not everyone in the monarchy was on board with that. A source familiar with the palace's inner workings shared a chilling insight. The king hadn't wanted Archie and Lily to carry the titles, and the British passports, once created, would be the first and perhaps the only legal proof of their names. Let that sink in. These passports wouldn't just be travel documents, they'd be receipts, irrevocable proof that legally these children were royal. Once printed, once stamped, there would be no going back, no public relations walk back, no quiet revisions. It would be on record, and that's what made the delay so unnerving. Because if the palace wasn't ready to accept Archie and Lilibet as royals in public, what would it mean for them in private, in protection, in dignity? For Harry and Meghan, this wasn't about clout, it was about justice. And to deny their children what was rightfully theirs felt like a punishment they couldn't stay silent about. By month 5, Harry had had enough. What began as confusion had become something far more corrosive, a gnawing sense that his children were being held hostage by a system that still wanted to punish him for walking away. He wasn't just battling the UK government, he was fighting ghosts, centuries of protocol, pride, and palace politics, all aimed at keeping his family in check. So in the face of silence, Prince Harry did what no one expected. He sought counsel, not from Buckingham Palace, not from royal advisors, but from the one man whose opinion he trusted more than anyone in the royal establishment, Earl Charles Spencer, his late mother's brother. Earl Spencer, who had fiercely defended Princess Diana after her death. Earl Spencer, who had stood at Westminster Abbey and publicly condemned the royal family's treatment of his sister while the entire world watched. To Harry, he wasn't just an uncle, he was a link to truth, to honor, to Diana's legacy. And in that private meeting, far away from palace walls, Harry made a proposal so shocking that it reportedly left Spencer momentarily speechless. He asked, "What if we changed the children's surname to Spencer? No more Windsor, no more Sussex, no more Mountbatten, just Spencer. His mother's name, his mother's blood. A name untainted by scandal, politics, or hierarchy." According to sources close to the family, Harry explained his reasoning with haunting clarity. "My children are being denied what's theirs because they're legally HRH. If the palace won't allow them to be called Sussex, then maybe it's time to call them what they truly are, Spencer. At least that name means something to me. It was raw, it was desperate, but it was also one of the most personal acts of rebellion a royal has ever contemplated, because to abandon the name Windsor, a name rooted in power, history, and lineage, was to declare that it no longer meant protection, it meant politics. And Harry had seen what those politics did to his mother. By aligning with Spencer, he wasn't just reaching back. He was taking a stand, drawing a line in the sand between the past that hurt him and the future he wanted to protect. It wasn't a threat, it was a last resort. At first glance, changing a surname might seem like a legal technicality, a simple switch on a birth certificate. But in the world of royalty, names are not just identifiers, they're ideologies. They carry the weight of legacy, loyalty, and lineage. So when Prince Harry considered replacing Mountbatten Windsor with Spencer, it wasn't just an administrative move, it was a full-blown declaration of war. The name Spencer carries with it the memory of his late mother, Princess Diana, a woman beloved by the public but scorned by the palace. A woman who, even after her divorce from King Charles, had her HRH title stripped away. She became, in the eyes of the monarchy, an outsider. And now Harry was preparing to honor her in the most profound way possible, by handing down her name, not his father's, to the next generation. This would have been an unprecedented break from royal tradition. Not even Princess Diana herself had been able to protect her children from the shadow of the monarchy. But Harry was now willing to go further than she ever could, to officially reject the very name that had defined his life from the moment he was born. By choosing Spencer, Harry was doing more than choosing his mother. He was choosing sides. Would have been a symbolic disavowal of everything the name Windsor stood for, the monarchy, the crown, King Charles, and generations of royal protocol. and it would have sent a global message: I am not my father's son in name, nor in spirit. But this wasn't just personal. It would have had political reverberations far beyond the Sussex household. Royal analysts have said that such a move could have triggered a constitutional stir. How would foreign governments address Archie and Lilibet on diplomatic documents? Would Spencer children have security protections abroad? Would they be acknowledged at royal events, or permanently cast out as civilians? It would have also put intense pressure on King Charles, forcing him to answer a devastating question. Why did his own son feel the need to erase the royal family name to protect his children? In the monarchy, names are destiny, and Harry, for the first time in modern royal history, was seriously considering rewriting his children's fate, letter by letter. By month 6, the silence had become unbearable. For Harry and Meghan, what started as a passive delay had escalated into something more sinister: a cold resistance, a quiet refusal, a standoff laced with history, hierarchy, and humiliation. And behind it all, the most painful part wasn't what was said, it was what wasn't. No one from the palace called, no one from the Home Office offered answers, no one would confirm or deny whether the titles Prince, Princess, HRH were the issue. It was a slow drip of silence, and it began to feel strategic. So the Sussexes decided to do something the royal family rarely does. They fought back. Legally. According to close sources, Harry and Meghan's legal team began preparing a formal letter addressed to the UK Home Office, the branch responsible for issuing passports and handling immigration matters. But this wasn't a polite follow-up, it was a warning shot. The letter invoked something rarely used by royals: a data subject access request, a legal tool under the UK's Data Protection Act that allows individuals to demand all records, emails, internal notes, and communications involving them. Essentially, if someone inside the government was intentionally blocking their children's applications, this letter would expose it, in black and white. The move wasn't just bold, it was risky, because if they pushed too hard, it could trigger a political scandal. If they didn't push at all, they'd be complicit in their own children's erasure. For Harry, it was about more than just passports. It was about standing up to the same faceless machinery that had failed his mother, about refusing to let history repeat itself behind closed doors, while cameras captured smiles and polite nods on the palace balcony. So they pulled the legal lever, and suddenly, without warning, without explanation, the passports arrived. Just like that. No statement, no apology, no note attached, just 2 small envelopes carrying the weight of an entire war. Some would call it coincidence. Others would call it damage control. But to Harry and Meghan, it felt like something else, a quiet retreat. A sign that their pushback worked, and that someone somewhere had blinked. The documents were in their hands now, but the cost, trust, once again had been shattered. Once the passports were finally issued, the world naturally turned its gaze toward Buckingham Palace. The silence had been broken, but not by words, by action. And that action, the sudden approval after 6 months of stonewalling, raised a flurry of uncomfortable questions. Was King Charles involved? Did someone in the royal household deliberately stall the process? Why now? And why only after legal pressure? When pressed by reporters from the Telegraph, the palace didn't mince words. A spokesperson issued a statement that was as brief as it was absolute. No, the palace had not objected to the use of the HRH titles. No, the palace had no involvement in the delay. No interference, no agenda, no fingerprints. On the surface, the response was classic Buckingham Palace, polished, neutral, and unyielding. But beneath that calm exterior, the contradictions were glaring. If the palace truly had no stake in the matter, why had Harry and Meghan's children gone half a year without documents? Why had the titles become such a contentious point behind the scenes? And why did everything move instantly once the threat of legal transparency was introduced? To many observers, the denial didn't hold up. Because while the palace may have been able to distance itself publicly, it's no secret that the monarchy wields quiet influence behind the curtain, especially when it comes to matters of protocol, titles, and perception. And here's the uncomfortable truth: the royal family doesn't need to issue formal commands. A subtle suggestion, a raised eyebrow, a carefully chosen phrase in an off-the-record conversation can be enough to move mountains, or halt them, which is exactly why Harry's private confrontation with Earl Spencer mattered so much. Because It exposed a far deeper wound than a passport delay. It revealed that Harry felt so isolated, so excluded from his own bloodline, that he was willing to erase his royal identity just to gain a sense of autonomy. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum. Whether the palace officially intervened or not, their silence and refusal to defend Archie and Lilibet's rights spoke volumes. Because in a monarchy built on legacy, the true threat isn't always rebellion. Sometimes it's exposure. And for a palace that thrives on secrecy, Harry's pushback may have been the closest thing to a public reckoning the firm has faced in years. To the outside world, the debate over royal titles might seem petty, insignificant even, just names, just formalities, just ceremonial fluff. But to Prince Harry, the stakes couldn't be higher, because this isn't about prestige. It's about power, identity, and freedom. The titles of Prince and Princess, along with the styling of His Royal Highness or Her Royal Highness, have always carried weight in the monarchy, not just culturally but legally and symbolically. They influence security access, diplomatic treatment, and most importantly, how someone is viewed by the royal machine. Harry has lived both sides of that coin. He's worn the uniform, marched in the parades, been front and center on the royal balcony. But he's also watched his role shrink when he dared to ask questions, when he dared to protect his family, when he dared to leave. So when it came to Archie and Lilibet, Harry wasn't going to let the institution decide their future before they even had a say in it. According to those close to him, Harry doesn't care whether his children choose to live royal lives or not. He's not demanding they be called Your Highness in everyday conversation. But he does care that they have the right to choose, a right that was taken from him the moment he was born into the firm. And that's the key. This entire battle was never about pushing his kids into royal roles. It was about keeping their options open, because if Archie or Lilibet one day decide they want to reconnect with royal life, participate in ceremonial events, or represent charitable causes under the crown, they'll need their titles to do so. And if they don't, if they want to remain private citizens away from the spotlight, they can walk away. But they'll do so on their own terms, not because of decisions made in secret behind palace doors. Harry is trying to break the cycle, to give his children what he never had: agency. He remembers what it felt like to have his path decided for him, to smile for cameras while screaming inside, to bear a title that came with scrutiny, not shelter. This fight, however small it may seem on paper, was a battle for autonomy. Because in a monarchy where everything is inherited, Harry is fighting for the one thing that shouldn't be dictated by tradition: choice. At its core, this wasn't just a story about documents, titles, or royal procedure. It was about a wound that still hasn't healed. The passport delay, on paper, was a bureaucratic issue, but in reality it symbolized something far more painful: a fundamental lack of trust between father and son, and a monarchy that still views Harry not as family, but as a liability. From the moment he and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, Harry has drawn a line in the sand. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. He said it in interviews, memoirs, and documentaries. He no longer trusts the institution, and it's not hard to see why. Behind the palace gates, decisions are rarely transparent. Alliances shift, narratives are crafted, and the same machinery that once protected Diana failed her in her darkest hours. Now Harry sees echoes of that same system in the way his children were treated. He suspected that the delay in their passports wasn't just carelessness, it was intentional, a calculated reminder that even from thousands of miles away, the monarchy could still pull strings, still exert pressure, still make his family's life just a little harder. So when he considered abandoning the name Windsor, it wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a symptom of something deeper, something broken. Because when a son is willing to reject the name passed down by his father, when he's ready to erase that connection to protect his children, that's not politics, that's pain. Whether King Charles was directly involved in the delay or not almost doesn't matter. What matters is that Harry believed he was. And that belief says everything about the state of their relationship. Even after the passports were issued, the emotional fallout lingered. No royal statement was released in support of Archie or Lilibet. No olive branch was extended. No public acknowledgement that the situation had caused distress. Instead, the silence continued, a silence louder than any headline. A silence that confirmed what many suspected, that the House of Windsor might still see Harry as an outsider, that his family, his children, might always live in a space between royal and rejected. This wasn't about names. It was about power, perception, and a monarchy struggling to hold onto its image at the cost of one of its own. In the end, the passports were delivered, the titles stayed intact, and the name Spencer, for now, remains tucked away in the shadows of a conversation that nearly changed royal history. But even though Harry didn't follow through with the name change, the fact that he almost did is what matters most, because it reveals just how close this story came to rewriting the very DNA of the monarchy. For centuries, the royal name has represented more than blood. It stood for power, prestige, duty, continuity. To carry the name Windsor is to be part of something bigger than yourself. But for Prince Harry, that name has become a battleground, a symbol not of belonging, but of betrayal. His quiet, emotional conversation with Earl Spencer was more than a family discussion. It was a cry for clarity, for legacy, for liberation. Harry stood at a crossroads between two worlds, one defined by royal lineage, the other by personal truth. And in that moment, with everything on the line, he nearly chose truth over tradition, not just for himself but for his children. That choice, however fleeting, says more about the modern monarchy than any formal statement ever could. Because if a prince, born into unimaginable privilege, is willing to walk away from his own surname, from the very institution that shaped his identity, then what does that say about the crown? What does that say about the cost of survival inside the palace walls? And perhaps most importantly, what does that say about the future? Because this battle over names and titles isn't the end. It's a warning shot, a signal that deeper confrontations are coming. About inheritance, public image, and who truly holds power in a family where nothing is ever fully private. For Harry, it was never just about paperwork. It was about giving his children the freedom to define themselves, on their terms, not the monarchy's. And for the rest of us, this moment is a glimpse into a royal family still struggling to evolve, still clinging to control, even as its members push to breathe. The story of the House of Windsor is still being written, but thanks to Harry, it's clear that the next chapter will be anything but quiet.